Chapter 7. The New Watcher. Ethan sat in his car on the empty street for what felt like hours, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. But nothing came. The night remained still, the street remained empty, and the only sound was his own ragged breathing echoing in the confined space. Eventually, survival instinct kicked in. He couldn't stay here, exposed and vulnerable. He needed shelter, needed time to think, needed to figure out what had just happened and what it meant. He drove to a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, a fluorescent-lit sanctuary where the harsh lighting would make it impossible for anything to hide in the shadows. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced up when he ordered coffee and took a booth in the corner where he could see all the exits. For the first time in days, Ethan felt something approaching safety. The diner was public, well-lit, populated. Whatever was hunting him seemed to prefer isolation and darkness. Here, surrounded by the normal sounds of Atenite civilization, he could finally try to process what was happening to him. He pulled out his phone to check the time and froze. There were dozens of new files in his photo gallery. Whelmings, all of them, with text from the past few hours. Files he hadn't created, recorded by a phone that had been in his pocket the entire time. With shaking fingers, he opened the first video. It showed him sleeping in the motel bed, recorded from somewhere near the ceiling. The angle was impossible. There had been nowhere for a camera to be positioned that high, nothing to mount it on. But the footage was crystal clear, showing every detail of his unconscious form with disturbing intimacy. As he watched, a figure moved into frame from the edge of the screen. It was Lena, but wrong. Her movements too fluid, her proportions slightly off, as if someone had tried to recreate her from memory and gotten the details just slightly incorrect. She approached the bed with predatory grace, leaning over his sleeping form with an expression of hungry fascination. In the video, Dream Ethan shifted restlessly, and the Lena thing tilted its head like a curious bird studying prey. Then it reached out with one finger and traced a symbol on his forehead, the same angular marks he'd seen carved throughout their house. Where its finger touched, his skin seemed to glow briefly in the camera's recording. The video ended there. The second video was detained 20 minutes later. This one showed him still sleeping, but now there were more figures in the room. Shadows that moved independently of any light source, shapes that hurt to look at directly even through the phone screen. They surrounded the bed like attendees at some unholy ceremony, all focused on his unconscious form with that same predatory attention. The Lena thing was no longer alone. It had brought friends. Video after video showed the progression of the night, more shadows gathering, more symbols traced on his skin, more impossible watchers crowding into the small motel room until the space seemed to bend and stretch to accommodate them all. And through it all, he slept peacefully, completely unaware of the supernatural audience documenting his vulnerability. The final video was the most disturbing. T-Second, just before he'd awakened, it showed the Lena thing leaning close to his ear, its lips moving as if whispering something. On the phone's audio, he could hear his own breathing, the rustle of cheap sheets, the hum of the motel's air conditioning. But underneath it all, barely audible, was another sound. A voice that might have been Lena's, might have been something else entirely, speaking words in a language that made his teeth ache just to hear. As the video ended, he watched his sleeping self's eyes snap open with sudden, terrified awareness. That was when he'd awakened from the dream. But according to these videos, it hadn't been a dream at all. Ethan's coffee had gone cold while he watched the impossible recordings, his hands cramped from gripping the phone too tightly. Around him, the diner continued its late-night rhythm, the clink of dishes, the murmur of other insomniacs seeking refuge in fluorescent normalcy. But he felt disconnected from it all, separated by the terrible knowledge of what was hunting him. He scrolled past the videos to check his messages, and his blood turned to ice. There were dozens of text messages from Lena's number sent throughout the night while he'd been sleeping. Look how peaceful you are when you don't know you're being watched. I've been practicing with your wife's fingers. Getting better at using her phone. Do you like the videos? I thought you might want to see what you miss when you're asleep. She's still in here, still watching through these eyes, still screaming. Would you like to hear her scream? I could record that for you too, and then sent just minutes ago while he'd been watching the videos. Turn around. Ethan's head snapped up from his phone and he spun in the diner booth to look behind him. Standing outside the window, partially obscured by the reflection of the interior lights, was a familiar figure in a white nightgown. The Lena thing pressed its palm against the glass and smiled, its mouth moving in words he couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Found you, he bolted from the booth, nearly knocking over his coffee cup, and ran toward the diner's back exit. Behind him, he heard the sound of breaking glass, then the waitress screaming. But he didn't look back, couldn't look back because looking back meant seeing what was following him. The rear exit led to an alley filled with dumpsters and the smell of rotting food. Ethan ran toward his car, his footsteps echoing off the brick walls, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Behind him, something moved with inhuman speed, its presence pressing against his back like cold air. He reached his car and yanked open the door, throwing himself inside and hitting the lock button. In the rear-view mirror, he caught a glimpse of the thing that had been chasing him, tall, angular, wearing Lena's face like an ill-fitting mask. But as he watched, it stopped running and simply stood in the mouth of the alley, smiling that terrible smile. Because it didn't need to chase him anymore. Ethan's phone buzzed with a new video notification. Against every instinct, he opened it. The video showed the interior of his car from the perspective of the passenger seat. It showed him sitting in the driver's seat, staring at his phone, watching the very video he was currently watching. An infinite loop of observation. Watcher watching, watcher watching watcher. But in the background, barely visible in the car's dark interior, was something else. A shape that moved when he moved, that breathed when he breathed, that occupied the same space he did but remained just out of direct sight. The video's thumbtape showed it was being recorded live. Right now, Ethan spun in his seat, looking for the source of the recording, but the car was empty except for him. Yet the video continued playing on his phone, showing him spinning, showing him searching, showing him growing more desperate with each passing second. At the bottom of the screen, a message appeared in white text. "You can't see me because you're not looking in the right place." Another message. "I'm not behind you. I'm not beside you." And then, as understanding dawned with horrible clarity, "I'm inside you." The video feed changed perspective, and suddenly Ethan was looking at himself from inside his own head. He could see his hands holding the phone, could see the steering wheel in front of him, could see everything exactly as he was seeing it in real life. But overlaid on his normal vision were other images, symbols and shadows, impossible geometries that existed in the spaces between thoughts. And everywhere, watching from angles that shouldn't exist, were eyes. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, all focused on him with predatory hunger. The final message appeared across his field of vision, written in letters that seemed to burn themselves into his retinas. "Game never ended. You just became the new player." Ethan screamed and threw the phone against the dashboard, shattering the screen. But even with the device destroyed, he could still feel that alien presence inside his skull, could still sense those impossible eyes watching from within. He staggered out of the car and fell to his knees in the alley, retching onto the asphalt as his body rejected the fundamental wrongness of what was happening to him. When the spasms finally stopped, he looked up to find the Lena thing standing over him, its expression almost pitying. "Now you understand," it said in a voice that was becoming less like his wife's with every word. "There's no escape from a game where you're both the player and the playing field." It crouched beside him, close enough that he could smell the copper scent of blood on its breath. "She tried to warn you," it continued conversationally. "All those nights when she stood watching over your bed, all those desperate attempts to teach you the rules, she was trying to prepare you for this moment." Ethan tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but only a broken whisper emerged from his throat. "What I want is simple," the thing said, as if reading his thoughts. "I want to exist fully, completely, without the need for borrowed flesh or stolen attention. And now, thanks to your wife's sacrifice, I can." It stood and looked down at him with something that might have been genuine sadness. "The game is changing, Ethan. The rules are evolving. Soon, there won't be a distinction between the watcher and the watched, between the hunter and the hunted." It turned away, beginning to fade into the alley shadows. "Soon, everyone will be both." As it disappeared, its final words echoed in the confined space. "Welcome to the next level." And then remained kneeling in the alley for a long time after it was gone, staring at the broken pieces of his phone scattered across the asphalt. In the reflective surface of the largest fragment, he could see his own face looking back, but behind his reflection, barely visible, was another face entirely. Alina's face, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror and desperate love. She was still there, still trapped, still watching from inside whatever had consumed her. And now, he realized with growing horror, he was going to join her. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, he was both the prize and the board on which it would be played.